Hello and welcome to Wild Earth Ways. I'm Kat, and in today's video I'm talking about different ways to use oracle decks. So I have here a few different decks which I'll be sharing and talking about the ways in which I use them. This is most of my oracle decks, although not all of them. I first came to tarot, and it was many years before I got my first oracle deck after buying a tarot deck. I was interested in tarot as a historical artifact, as a machinery for telling stories, and as a system. So I wasn't initially drawn to oracle decks, which are all following different ideas and exploring different ideas. But I have to say that now I enjoy oracle decks because of the variety that they bring to my practice and the different things that I can learn from them because of that variety. And I find that it's not like a one-size-fits-all with oracle decks. When I get a new deck, I have to look and explore and find out what's the best way of using that deck. So I'm going to share in this video, I think, 8 different ways in which I use oracle decks. And I'm going to start with this deck here, the Priestess of Light Oracle, which was created by Sandra Ann Taylor, and the art is by Kimberly Weber. I really love this deck because I think the art is absolutely beautiful and the messages are also very good. And the way I use this deck is typically after a tarot reading. So if I've done a tarot reading and then I feel like I still need a little bit more guidance, clarification, to think about the questions a little bit further, then I might draw a card from this deck to explore that reading further. So this is the backs of this deck, and you can see that the art is very beautiful. Here we can see clarity, planning, releasing, illusion. Every card has a keyword and then a few more keywords to explain the meaning. And then in the guidebook, there's a longer message as well as an affirmation. So for this one, clarity, which is card number 5, the affirmation is, I release illusion and confusion. I think clearly, focus on my plans, and let my life shine. And I find that this deck combines very well with all different kinds of decks. So if you have a more kind of grounded deck, it can be good to bring in a different kind of energy. But really all kinds of decks can work with this one. So the one I'm showing here is the Ad Orbiter Tarot, which I think combines really nicely with this deck. So, for example, here we have the 10 of Wands and the 2 of Swords, and the messages go with the flow, letting go, cleansing and receiving, which is quite interesting because 10 of Wands we associate with being overburdened, and 2 of Swords of being stuck or in a place of stasis. But it's interesting to me that the position that the woman has her hands is actually reminiscent of the Rider-Waite-Smith 2 of Swords with the crossed hands holding the swords, although here we have a different image, and an image of eclipse, so that also goes quite well. I feel like we're moving from this kind of fullness in the circle of the sunflower and the 10 of Wands, which is a very full card, to willingness to be kind of empty and start again in this eclipse image as we move through the letting go here. So the next one I have here is sensuality, feminine wisdom and passion, with the High Priestess and the 5 of Swords. So that's a really interesting combination as well. Just by chance, I haven't planned them out in any way, but I do find that this deck provides very clear messages. So if the tarot reading is a little uncertain, this one is very clear, and I do enjoy the very beautiful imagery of this deck. The artist Kimberly Weber, on her website, she speaks about how she began her career as an animal rights activist, sharing images of treatment of animals in animal agriculture and other ways in which animals are suffering in our world. And then she started to feel instead that she wanted to share images of beauty to inspire people with more love of the world. And this really resonates with me very strongly. I also used to be an animal rights activist, and I know how much traumatic and disturbing imagery you can be exposed to in that field. And I also felt after a time that I wanted to turn towards an approach that was more about love and compassion and inspiring care rather than shock tactics, I suppose, in that kind of animal rights movement. And I really enjoy the relationship between humans and animals in this deck as kind of companions to the figures. So that is the Priestess of Light Oracle, a deck I often use to clarify a reading at the end of a tarot reading. Another way that we can use oracle decks is at the beginning of a reading. So here I have the Forest Fae by Nadia Turner. And this deck, it's a mini deck by Rockpool. And you can see each card has a figure and a message. So here it says, to the green wood, seek comfort and acceptance, be kind to yourself. And so then this could be a prompt for doing a tarot reading to explore further in what ways we might be seeking comfort or needing to seek comfort. And the deck I pair with this one is this deck, the Tarot de Maria Celia by Lena Jim Narciso, which is a Marseille style deck. And I think it goes very well with it because it's kind of got this cute size and imagery. So here we have the Hermit and the Nine of Cups. So that's quite interesting. I think the combination of the Hermit, that sort of turn to quietness, refuge, solitude, with this message of seeking comfort and acceptance, and then the Nine of Cups, which is about enjoying plenty. And you can really see it in these kind of fruits and flowers imagery with the 9 cups. So we have 2 ways to seek comfort, I think, in this tarot reading. To allow yourself to have some alone time, and also to allow yourself to enjoy like physical pleasures. And then here's another example. Green Witch. Connect to the spirits and energy of your local landscape. Seek enchantment. Let's see what comes up. We have the 7 of Swords and the 2 of Wands. And next we have the Old One. The Ancestors' Call. Seek their wisdom. And here we have the 6 of Wands and the 5 of Wands. So the message can be then interpreted through the tarot deck according to how you read the tarot. So the next, I do find though that some oracle decks are better read alone, not always with a tarot deck. So for example, I usually use these ones just as one card pull readings. So this is the Goddess Love Oracle by Wendy Andrew and the Goddess Dream Oracle by Wendy Andrew. And I will pull from these one card at the end of the day because I find that they provide very nice messages to sort of end the day out with. So I'll show you a couple of examples. Oh, by chance here we have sleep, slow down. So this is the deck I've been using to sometimes draw a card at the end of the day to provide an image or a message to contemplate before going to sleep. And this deck is very much full of images of comfort and togetherness to be found in nature. So there are lots of humans holding animals or animals holding humans. And it's about connecting with the kind of the energy of the nature goddess. And the messages in the book explain this further and always have also a practice. So there's a message explaining the image and then also a suggested practice. So for this one, dedication, the practice is dedicate a small part of each and every day to spending time in a meaningful place to you. Sit in this space and bring attention to your breath and your body. It is a task that is so simple, yet it is one that takes dedication to practice every day. And it continues to explain a little bit more about this dedication practice. So this, I think, is a nice deck for daily single card pulls. But for some decks, daily is too much. And I need like more space between doing a pull. This is an example of a deck which I need more time between pulls. This is the Weaver's Oracle by Caroline Hillier, and I draw a card from this deck around the time of each new moon and each full moon. So 2 cards over the space of a moon cycle. The cards are stunning. They show different women with different kinds of cloth and clothing and artifacts. And each of the women is associated with a story in this wonderful guidebook. Caroline Hillier has written really fascinating stories to go with each of these cards, as well as oracle messages. And you can see I note down the date in which I get each card and read those stories. And some of them I've had more than once, and some of them I've never pulled yet. So I just see what comes up with each moon. And I really appreciate the representation of older women in this deck. And it really comes alive with the stories that Caroline has written with them, and provides a kind of wisdom, a thought at each time that I work with it. I don't read it predictively to see what is my weeks ahead going to be like. I just am looking for a story, some thoughts to bring to whatever experiences are happening in my life at that time, and to use to contemplate. When I first saw this deck, I thought I wasn't sure if I would be confident using it, reading it, because the images are quite wild. They're full of energy. They're really quite extraordinary. And I've actually found that the texts which are in the guidebook are very helpful in explaining and bringing the figures closer in a way that they feel like teachers or kind of ancestors even. It's a very unique deck. So this is the one I use for my moon pulls. It's at the full moon and at the new moon. Another way in which I use oracle decks is to inspire poetry. So the decks I've used most commonly for this are the Wild Unknown decks. So I have here the Wild Unknown Tarot by Kim Krans, the Wild Unknown Animal Spirit, and the Wild Unknown Archetypes. And what I'll do is usually pull 3 cards from the tarot. Don't know if I'll have space here. Let's see. So 3 cards from the tarot, and then 1 animal spirit. And 1 archetype. So this all together, see if I can arrange it so you can see a bit more, will inspire writing a poem on the images and ideas brought up. And sometimes I'll focus in on maybe 1 card more than the others, depending on what message calls to me from the different cards. So the Animal Spirit deck is the first oracle I ever bought. It's each card shows a different animal, and it's arranged into elements, which I quite like. So they follow the same system as the tarot: earth, air, fire, water, and spirit. So we can see that moth is air, zebra is fire, wolf is earth, cobra fire. And the guidebook is also really excellent that accompanies this deck. I do tend to use it with the guidebook because I find Kim Kranz's messages very interesting. And likewise with the archetypes deck, I certainly use this with the very excellent guidebook. The messages in the guidebook are quite short, but they're very interesting, especially if you're kind of learning about archetypes. And I have to admit, I held off buying this deck because I don't care for the art in it. It's in this collage style, and I don't generally like collage style decks. I think I only own 2, this one and the Field Tarot. I find it a little disjointed, and it's just not as aesthetically pleasing to me as this kind of art, which is more coherent. And it's why I haven't bought her alchemy deck. Having said that, the messages and ideas in this deck are fascinating and worth exploring slowly, which is why I do this practice of the poetry reading. I don't ask any particular question, I just see what comes up. And I like to do this outside, so usually in the garden, when there's some peaceful time at the weekend usually. So that's another way in which of using oracle decks, which is as inspiration for poetry. Another way in which I use one of my oracle decks is actually as bookmarks. So I have one particular deck which I do this with. Every time I start reading a new book, I draw a card from this deck and use it as a bookmark, which then accompanies me reading the book as a kind of counterpoint. So this deck is the Oracle of the Kitsunes. This is the back, the foxes. And here is the deck. So I have it in French. It's created by Lucy Cavendish and the art is by Meredith Dillman. Now, I bought this deck for a very particular reason because long ago I lived in Paris. I lived in Paris for 4 years, and while I was living there I wrote a novel about kitsunes living in Paris. And then last year I was visiting Paris and I saw this deck in the shops there, and I decided to buy it because of course it's a kitsune deck and I was in Paris, so I thought just for sentimental reasons I would buy it, even though the artwork is not really my aesthetic. and I felt like it's very light, and I didn't feel like I wanted to use it in the same ways that I've been describing for the other decks. So I decided to use it as bookmarks. But I've actually found that it's got a lot more depth than I first realised. The messages in the guidebook are really well written by Lucy Cavendish and translated by Charlene Perez in this book. And they have also provided a very interesting image that often provides a very relevant counterpoint to the novel that I've been reading with it. So it's actually been had a lot more substance than I first realised. But I'm going to continue using it in this way as my sort of bookmark deck, because I think it works very well for this very storytelling deck that is a little bit lighter than some of my other decks. So that's the Oracle of the Kitsune, or Kitsune, by Lucy Cavendish and Meredith Dillman. Another way I use one of my Oracle decks is as a kind of calendar for the Wheel of the Year. So this deck, I have it in the bag, which was originally the Witch's Wisdom bag. This is the Green Wheel Oracle by Danielle Barlow, who is the artist of the Witch's Wisdom, which is a deck I've spoken about a few times already as being, it's really my favourite tarot deck. So I love that deck very much, and I got this deck because I enjoy Danielle Barlow's art, and it's a special deck. It has in it images for each of the Wheel of the Year celebrations, so the equinox, solstice and cross quarters, and it also has images for each of the moons of the month. And so what I do is I pull out the card for the Wheel of the Year on the days themselves, and also, or near those days, and I also pull out the card of the new moon each month. So this month's card is this one, the water moon, and I put this up on my wall. And sometimes I also do something else with this deck, which is that it has in it also these animal cards, as well as those moon and Wheel of the Year cards. It has these animal cards. So sometimes I'll also draw another card, an animal card, to accompany the moon for the month or the celebration that's happening as well, to see what the message is, what the energy is from this deck at that time. And there are short messages in the guidebook about each of the cards, which just provide another perspective on the changing seasons and different points of the year. So this is a kind of calendar deck for me, the Green Wheel Oracle by Danielle Barlow. So I have occasionally had Oracle decks which I don't find a use for, or I don't clearly connect to. I'm not a huge fan of Oracle decks that just have a keyword like gratitude or abundance or something like this. It can sometimes feel to me a little bit random, and I want to feel more coherence and in the deck. So for example, I did at one point have the Everyday Witch Oracle, and I didn't get along with it because it just felt to me just that every reading was just completely random, and I didn't feel connected with the messages. Now this is a deck which is a little bit like that for me. This is the Soul Trees Ascension deck created by Alison Williams Lee, but it's an extremely beautiful deck. Absolutely gorgeous. So every image is just stunning. They're all these trees with different colours, and the keywords are quite simple. Here we can see I am, follow through, empathy and compassion. The very simple messages, I suppose, but what I really love in this deck is the artwork. So I have tended to not use it so much as an oracle deck, and I have kept it really for the artwork as a kind of collection of art. And sometimes me and my kids will use the used cards to draw from, to copy, to create drawings or paintings, and this is a nice one for that, though I can't say that anything I can draw is, although this looks simple, it isn't simple. So I don't create anything like what is created here in this deck. So I'm not saying this to suggest to denigrate the art at all, but to say that it provides a fun inspiration and activity that me and my kids can do together as well to create some art sometimes. And we use some of the other decks for this as well, especially actually this one, the Green Wheel Oracle. We sometimes have used the different animals to create artworks of our own, inspired by the decks. So even if I'm not using a deck necessarily to read from, in this case the art is so beautiful that I've kept it as a kind of collection of art, and I will sometimes call on it with a tarot reading, for example, if that's the kind of feel that I'm looking for. So this is the Soul Trees Ascension deck by Alison Williams Yee, and this is an independent deck. It's available on Etsy, I think. So this has been 8 different ways in which I use oracle decks, which I think could be applied to many different decks. Most of what I've talked about here could be done with different decks, whatever decks you happen to have or prefer. They're not specific necessarily to these decks. So I do have a few other decks which are more specific in their use to those specific decks. So I might talk about those in future videos. But that's it for today. Thanks very much for watching. I hope you've enjoyed it, and I hope to see you again soon.